agenda because you will send a message that you have changed the
Super.
Y'all
Welcome everybody to this regularly scheduled meeting of the San Marcos CISD Board of Trustees on September 18th at 6 o'clock. We are going to begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag and to the Texas flag, led by one of our San Marcos High School students as introduced by Coach Michelle Knight, please.
Good evening, everybody. This is Juliana De La Rosa. She is a Dazzler and an officer for Dazzlers, and she's here to say the pledges.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the Texas Pledge. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you, Juliana.
And next, I'm introducing public forum. We have one speaker who's signed up tonight, Ms. Carol Peters, to speak on the redistricting plan.
Good evening, trustees and Superintendent Cardona. I just wanted to say something about the redistricting plan that Mr. Rios is working on in his committee. I've read a lot about it in the newspaper. You've gotten a lot of press with Mr. Rios saying the reasons why we need to make this change. But I don't see any press as to why we should not make the change, why we should stay with the current plan and the current configuration. So I just wanted to mention my interest in it. I live in Margie Villapondos's district out in the Martindale area. And so Margie represents me. I have that one representative, but I also have two other representatives, our two at-large representatives. So I currently have 3 representatives. And Mr. Rios' argument seems to be that everyone should be happier if they only have one representative sitting on the board of trustees. So that to me just doesn't make any sense. I would rather have 3 different people that I could look to, 3 different people, 3 different maybe ideas, 3 different opinions on a topic, and 3 different people who would be willing to go to bat for something that I was interested in. So I prefer to have 3 rather than just one that's looking out to my particular interests. And I'm just so tired of reading about how 1 is better than 3. To me, it's obvious 3 is better than 1. So I would, and the other thing was that Mr. Rios seemed to think that having all individual districts, 7 different districts, would bring more voters to the ballot. I don't understand that either, because I get to go to the ballot 2 times, one for my 2 at-large members and one for Ms. Villapondo, whereas I would only get to go to the ballot and only get to vote for 1 person if we did the new plan. So to me, if you want more voters, you need to move your election to the November election. I think the reason why you're not getting enough voters is that it's in the May election. So anyway, I would like to speak in favor of the current reconfiguration and hope that y'all will think about the reasons for that as opposed to the reasons to switch to 7 individual districts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
Madam President, members of the board, good evening. Lots going on. We appreciate everybody taking the time out to be here on Monday. It's hard to believe we've entered week 6 of school. So if everybody's tired, there's a reason. We're not used to this early of a start, but our schools have hit the ground running. This is year 8, I think, the smoothest start to the school we've had. The kids are doing amazing. The teachers are more amazing. The principals, a lot to celebrate. And with that, I'd like to bring up Mr. David Underwood so we can begin to celebrate the reason why we all do what we do, and that's our kids.
Thank you, Dr. Cardona, President Ann Halsey, and members of the board. I want to bring up for you two different groups today. We'll begin with outstanding performers for UIL Texas Solo and Ensemble Contest. That is held back in the summer at the end of the previous school year, but I'm going to let Ms. Dawn Sheridan Reinhuber come up and explain that a little bit better as to why we're celebrating it now.
Surprise. So, out of the 27,000 kids, roughly, that go to UIL solo and ensemble competition, very few make it to the state level. You have to receive a superior rating on the highest classification or the hardest classification of a solo. And so that means they get the highest grade on the hardest solos. Those kids get to go to state competition, the state UIL competition for voice and piano and strings, and that's why two of our kiddos are here tonight. Out of all of the kids that get to go to state, each judge is allowed to nominate one, possibly two students from all of the kids that they judged over the course of 3 days at the state competition. And San Marcos High School is very, very lucky to have two students receive that honor this year. From Ben and Cora both got outstanding performance awards at UIL. And that just means that goes so far above and beyond just correct notes and rhythms. It's really an exceptional, beyond their year's performance that they are now being acknowledged for. So.
Members of the board, please join. Yeah, don't be shy. This is like top 3% of the state is what Cora is demonstrating. That's how important this is. We're talking a champion of champions, so to speak. Okay.
I'm good.
Ready, 1, 2, 3.
All right.
I would love to give an extra shout out to her voice teacher, who's part of our team in the fine arts room over there, Ms. Mackenzie Powell.
And next up, board members, you may just want to stay put. We'll bring up Mr. Gabe Balderrama, who was going to talk to you about the youth orchestra from San Antonio, YOSA, and he's going to tell you what recognition we are responsible for this evening on that.
Hello, I'm Gabriel Balderrama. To piggyback off of what Don said, we also have an orchestra member who also got a UIL Outstanding Performer Medal. He just couldn't be here tonight. He has a private lesson in Wimberley, and he's getting ready for all-state auditions coming up soon. But yeah, otherwise he would have been here. So the rest of the orchestra, our varsity orchestra, we submitted an application to enter the Youth Orchestra of San Antonio YOSA Invitational. The YOSA Invitational is held once per year, and they select the 16 best ensembles, whoever applies, and they get to go play at the Tobin Center in San Antonio. For free. They get a free recording for free and a free photography shoot as well. We're going to be playing a 40-minute concert on Monday, May 13th, down there in that amazing hall. So it's a really big recognition, being, recognized as one of the top young performing groups in the greater San Antonio area.
Parents?
Well, thank you so much, Board, for this opportunity, because if you remember, it's just 11 years ago that we started Strings. And this is now a vibrant program with over 200 students in all of our 6 through 12 orchestras. And you're seeing some students now that are starting to be recognized across this area as being some of the best. And it's because y'all first initially invested in orchestra in San Marcos CISD 11 years ago. Thank you.
We have Kayla Adams, who's our president, our vice president, Zelda Kanice, and then we have our event coordinator, Lucas Bauer.
Congratulations again to our outstanding choir and orchestra performers. It's very exciting to see programs like that growing and thriving in San Marcos.
Have a good evening.
Next up, we are going to receive a report from the Redistricting Committee on the map that we have been distributed. Mr. Rios, please. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Thank you all for allowing the committee to be your extension and help out during this process. Just to set some context, the redistricting committee came about in the fall of 2021. And initially, the request from the trustee board then was to present a 7-0 configuration to see what that would look like, and to do the legwork and research for that based on the results of the 2020 census. Immediately after the committee was formed, we also got word that our district was really out of compliance for a constitutional voting district in our 5-2 configuration just because of the 2020 census. So we quickly shifted gears and were able to put together a compliant 5-2 configuration that we presented to you with an initial 7-0 at the end of that first sequence. And so when we presented that, that was accepted. The 5-2 now was compliant. The district went through and took the proper procedures to make that our legal configuration, and of course our election went off and our board grew and changed and evolved. Now set it back into last fall. Once again, the committee was resurrected, and each one of you once again brought forth a person to represent you on the committee, and we went through and once again did our diligence, taking the 7-0 map that we first had and coming up with several configurations. We had basically a total of about seven configurations that we came up with that we evaluated based on different types of circumstances. I'll go through that. But really, what we wanted was something that was legal and something that met the requirements that you all set forth for this committee. I present up here the actual committee members and who their representative on the board was, and that was included also in your packet. But just talking about what came out of the work from this team. The team is very passionate about getting together and looking at and trying to understand what would make sense to present a recommendation for you guys to consider. We had a few requirements. First and foremost, it had to meet the minority distribution that would make it a constitutional voting member district. That's basically less than 10% standard deviation for the minority distribution based on the 2020 census. We also had a requirement to try and keep neighborhoods together. And that was really essential because some people, in the ways the districts were set up, some neighborhoods were split. And so we tried as much as possible to go ahead and maintain that or keep as much of it together as possible. But because of the density population with those 2020 census, there was some changes that had to happen. And then, in going through that, one of the misconceptions about the voting member districts is that a lot of folks today think that they're based around the elementary schools. And as we went through our discussions, we went through our meetings, we really decided, why don't we start with the elementary schools and then build around that? And that ended up actually being probably the best way for us to make 7 districts that are constitutional and would work for San Marcos. So the other thing that we had that was not a requirement, it was actually a consideration, was to try and give a district for each current trustee, because we knew if we changed the district configuration and multiple trustees shared a district, it would kind of cause a little bit of process changes that we had a plan for, but we thought the easiest way to make the transition was if we can just give each current trustee their own district that they would represent. And then the other thing that we saw, just because between the growth between the 2010 census and the 2020 census was pretty considerable, we know that this is probably going to have to be looked at again after the 2030 census, because our area is just growing tremendously and our district is changing tremendously. So we know that this is something that'll be in place for a period of time before it's going to have to be relooked at again. I also have on here the times that the committee met. We met online initially, and then we were meeting at the public library. Thank you to trustees who came to some of our meetings. It was great to have you there. You guys got to hear a lot of the conversations, a lot of the discussion, and a lot of the good participation that we had with the committee members, really asking good questions, because we wanted to make a recommendation that really made sense. So you have that in packets. You also have the maps there with you. I think there's some bigger ones printed out, but you do have them in your books there. But this does meet the distribution, and if you look at the way that's broken out, the standard deviation is less than 10%. It is 7.87. And the population distribution is also presented there for each district, so you know the minority breakout for that. And then, of course, this is what that new map looks like. And so, like I said, we tried our very best to really keep whole neighborhoods together. But it really represents a shift in the representation for a very fast-growing district in our community. But then also, like I said, now it's really built around the elementary schools. And that is the proposal. It's a recommendation of Map D, and that's what we are presenting to you from the committee for consideration. I'd like to, if I could, I wanted to ask any of the committee members that are here just to at least stand up, because they did volunteer their time for this effort, and just be recognized. And now I open it up to any questions or anything that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rios. I know that this has been a time-consuming and laboriously detailed process, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the efforts of everybody involved and all the volunteer committee members. Do my colleagues have any questions, would request any more information from Mr. Rios or the committee at this time?
No, but thank you very much for all your efforts.
You are quite welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we are going to receive our academic report, starting off with a mental health update.
Sorry, y'all. That's it. Yes. Thank you for your patience. Good evening, Board of Trustees and Superintendent Dr. Cardona. My name is Adriana Guerrero, and I currently serve as a Director of Social Emotional Learning and Guidance. For today's presentation, our learning objective will be to provide you with an overview of San Marcos CISD's mental health services, and we'll also be providing you with a deeper understanding of our Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education, also known as Project Aware. And so we'll have our staff introduce themselves as well. So what is mental health, right? So it's really important at all stages of life, and it can include from social to emotional and psychological areas. Mental health really affects, right, how we think, how we act, and ultimately how we make decisions. And so it can really define how we as adults and students manage stress, how we form social connections, right? How we relate to others, and then ultimately how we make decisions, right? Healthy decisions, how we eat, our quality of sleep, and all those things we have learned are foundational when it comes to learning outcomes, right? And so wellness and resiliency is important for our children to reach their goals and really, feel productive and contribute to their community. Now, according to the National Alliance of Mental Illness, approximately 1 in 5 children in the United States have a medical or clinical diagnosis. However, it may take an average of 11 years between the child's first symptoms and that medical diagnoses, right? So what does that mean for us here? We really need a preventative approach with interventions and school-based mental health services for our students. So here you have it, San Marcos CISD's mental health services. Factors such as access or even the stigma with mental health services and availability of services are some of the barriers that we have to face today. And so ensuring that we can increase the awareness with our teachers, our students, but as well as our community, really are gonna be, again, those resilient factors that help us support our students here. And so here you'll see that continuum that we offer at San Marcos CISD, which starts with leveraging the use of our professional school counselors. So you'll find them on all our campuses, and they are there to support guidance lessons in the classroom, as well as just individual group counseling that really focuses on, post-secondary goals and personal social development, as well as providing that support for situational, preventative, and even crisis or remedial support. Next, we have our social emotional learning counselors. These counselors are currently on secondary campuses, and so you'll notice a lot of the same supports are available. They also help with Tier 1 supports, which is fundamental when it comes to that preventative piece. And so ensuring that it really aligns to those competencies, those social skills that we want our kiddos, again, to thrive with. And they also provide that one-on-one support through that individual counseling lens, as well as the group support, preventative, remedial, and crisis support as needed. Next, we also partner with communities in schools. And so we have program managers now at all campuses, which is really exciting, y'all. I'm so happy to work with this program. They really partner with our teachers, our administrators, and their goal is to identify any barriers, right, that are school-based for our students or our families. And really, that is how they develop their plan to support our students. So it's very student-centered. And in addition, they also offer case management. So what does that mean? They're tracking data from academic to behavioral to attendance. Okay, so all along the way, we're having conversations, right, from our counselors, our SEL support staff, communities and schools, and all these staff members serve as that student support team, which is really exciting because now it's more than one person looking at data and student information or referrals, right? We're having conversations that are real and that are centered around student needs. Next up, we have MD Life, and this is a program that is new this year, and it's offered through Gear Up. This is targeting 7th graders, 8th graders, 11th, as well as seniors. And it's a virtual platform that offers behavior health where children and families can choose board certified professionals that match what their needs are, right? And so they would have just a plethora, so many different options to see, well, is this someone that, probably could provide this type of counseling service, or as a student, do I feel comfortable with, a male professional, a female professional? So those options are new and important to consider for our kiddos. Now, our campuses that have Gear Up at the secondary level also have a career center where they are able to serve as that liaison, right? So appointments are available 7 days a week, but what does that mean for us in the school setting, right? So Gear Up staff members are able to help support appointments in collaboration with our counselors, right, to ensure that there is a safe space for our students to use. We also have our Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education Project Aware program that you'll learn more about. And so with this program, we also have licensed mental health professionals that help just develop, again, from any procedures that are needed and conversations needed for mental health support. They also provide that support at 3 different campuses at this time. And so that would be Bonham Pre-K, which is also really exciting. That's new this year. And we have Ms. Hernandez at the high school as well, and Ms. Parker, who is housed at Rodriguez Elementary. And then last, we have Texas Child Health Access through telemedicine, so also known as TCHAT, where there is free virtual mental health services that are available. So our counselors, our professional school counselors, serve as that campus liaison to help support those appointments. So similar to what MD Live would look like, they help families, right, complete the intake process and register. There are definitely several steps in that process, and so it's important for parents to have that support from our schools in order to continue supporting our kids and their mental health needs.
Okay, so as mentioned, my name is Jennifer Parker, I go by Jenny Parker, and I am the Aware Community Project Manager for Project Aware. And this year I'm really excited to be in front of you all to present our other clinicians that we have on campus. They've just started this year, and so we've got Michaela Hernandez at the San Marcos High School and Diana Escamilla at Bonham Elementary. And then I'm at Rodriguez, and so we as a team together, so nice to have a team, are working on developing our different supports for Project Aware. So I'm gonna go through and break down a little bit more about what this looks like so you have a better idea. Okay, so Project Aware is a grant-funded program, and it is sponsored by, the grant is sponsored through SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. I might have missed a letter. And so with that partnership, when developing this grant, they established some goals that they used based on other data about school-based mental health services. And so taking those goals and then aligning them around what our district goals are, it matched pretty well, especially with programs that we already currently have. And so to break these down, you can see that the top one says to increase and improve access to school and community-based mental health. I wanted to pause on that piece. We've already started a lot of great work within this district doing that by having some partnerships and already having some resources together. And as this team has met with other people and partnered with our SEL counselors and our communities and schools and have come together to develop those supports. And so, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but what it looks like on the community-based part of it is knowing who the people are so that whenever our families are asking for support services, we've got a person's name and not just a phone number, and developing more of that real connection that way. And then the school-based approach is unique. You know, San Marcos is very blessed to have clinicians on site that are housed here that are San Marcos CISD employees. And so that gives us a world of ability to really connect. And if we're starting from Bonham Pre-K, where Ms. Escamilla is meeting with our families at that level, and then working all the way up to the high school, we've got a full coverage within this district, which is pretty powerful. So then the increased awareness, the second one, the increased awareness and identification of mental health issues among adults, and then promoting positive mental health. What's exciting about this piece is sometimes it's a little bit of an element that we miss, right? We're always thinking about our kids. But within this district administration, a lot of times that I've been in meetings with that I've heard the intentionality about thinking about our adults and then finding that time to be proactive by providing wellness techniques, wellness ideas, wellness activities. Our team could go into their professional learning communities or faculty meetings to talk about mental health literacy, to talk about their own wellness and their own skills so that they can be better equipped to then serve our students. Another goal that we have through Project Aware is to help the students develop competencies in self-regulation and pro-social behaviors. We are fortunate in this district that we've already started implementing different programs like Character Strong, and then making time at our different campuses to have morning meetings where our teachers can be intentional about the whole child and not necessarily just about the academic rigor, which is important, not saying that. So we've already developed that space and that piece of it, and then our role is to then be a partner with the counselors, the teachers, and the goal is to develop that capacity, like Ms. Guerrero was saying around that Tier 1 support. In this district, we've had a great understanding of the tiered services when it comes to our academic world, and it gets a little messy when it comes to mental health because there's that understanding between what mental health is, what mental illness is, like all those different components around it. But one of our goals is to let the teachers know how they can handle things at the Tier 1 level, like in their classroom, and having them feel that they have more of this capacity and this ability, or at least the knowledge of, right? So that's the first step of it. And then to then streamline it and then teach those pieces where we can go into Tier 2, which is going to be like more of our small group work, and then Tier 1, which is going to be more of our individualized services. So as it is with academics, but for framing it so that we've got an understanding when it comes to mental health in schools. And then finally, the last thing is to develop an infrastructure that will sustain services. And so being here, thank you for your time with this, starts it right now, right? This is where we start with our sustainability. And the important piece is the stakeholders. So it's the members in this group that are out here, it's you all there, and developing those connections so that one day when I work myself out of a job, it's still going on, right? And so we appreciate that this team can go and meet and be boots on the ground to build those connections and always looking ahead. Okay. So our outside partners, I wanted to kind of go through this to share with you about how our district as a whole partners together and then how Project Aware matches within this and blends our program with others. The top two are our local mental health authorities. And so that's Hill Country, who serves our Hays County students, and then Bluebonnet, who serves our Guadalupe and Caldwell County students. And so one of our goals has been to connect, again, we have connections already in place, but it's that developing and implementing policies and procedures in which our districts can then develop MOUs or other understandings and agreements. And so that we can bridge that gap of where that communication breakdown is. And so those conversations have already been had. Like we're already sitting down, figuring that out and really working together so that filling in those gaps. The next two, and there's multiple that we work with in this district, but I put Greater San Marcos Youth Council and Hayes Caldwell Women's Center to show that we have still the community coming to us, right? Once again, we're trying not to do this in isolation and making this where it's just siloed work, where we're all talking together. And so like Hayes Caldwell has come to the high school in the past to talk about like Dating Violence Prevention Month and doing presentations for our staff and where, and doing that. Our Greater San Marcos Youth Council has come from all ages, so it could be, pre-K to high school, and they're coming up here and doing groups. And so as long as we're constantly having conversations and everyone knows who's on first, so to speak, is a great place to do that, and it gives us the opportunity to do that. Then next to is an example of another place within this district that we found, and I'm going to talk about the SHAPE assessment in a second, but where we found that we had a little bit of a gap is Synacor, or specifically San Marcos Treatment Center in Austin Oaks. Those providers sometimes offer our students outpatient support. And so what was happening is our students would leave for outpatient support, and then they would come back to campus, and there would be a disconnect between the communication and that plan of action, that plan of care, maybe would have, wasn't as supported as it could have been. And so we've already sat in rooms with the people of those groups to talk about, as well as creating like MOUs so that we can fax each other discharge work, and so that we can fax each other like the intake, and so that we can promise our families. So for example, if it's in Austin Oaks and there needs to be an overnight stay, we can promise our families that there is a bed, and they've had that agreement with us. And so that's a really huge step, and I'm happy that our team can support that cause. The next one, community action, we work quite a bit within this district, part of the core 4 that's in this district. So our county, our university school district, and city are all working together, and so that's a nice resource that we have right in our backyard. And then as well as getting to know our local mental health clinicians that are there. And like the opportunity for us is that we can go and talk and meet with the people, so that way when we're talking to our families and facing our public, we have more of that connection, and it's that small town charm and feel that we have, right, that connection here. Okay, additional partners. So on this page right here, what this is that we are the San Marcos CISD Aware Team, but what also exists is a state Aware Team. And the State Aware Team meets with us on a regular basis. It is really led by our people from TEA. And so they facilitate different TEA actionable items, updates, directions to about what's going on in mental health in schools, other Project Aware districts, which by the way, in this area around 35, there's only 3 districts. So we're pretty kind of cool to be having this program, right? It's not everywhere, so that's nice. But we meet with them, and it's by name, like Mr. Millette and Mr. Ginky meet with us and facilitate those meetings. And so we have that direct contact with TEA's Mental Health and Support Services Division, and it's like meeting with TEA on a positive side, so that's nice. And then next we have Health and Human Services, and Ms. Gold is who partners with us there, and it's a wealth of resources that each of these departments have. But a lot of training opportunities, a lot of different things like that. One of her expertise levels is looking at their crisis supports. And so as in our district, as we're developing and implementing and going through our crisis protocols and procedures and really looking to that, we've got a resource to also see about where this looks at and how that makes sense and fits in. And the UT Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, Ms. Pauling and Ms. Sanders are the partners there, and they are data collectors. So through this grant, we have different goals we have to meet, and so we have to turn in our different data that shows that. So like policies that we do, students we're serving, we are collecting all that information, and then they're collecting that data to then turn it back over to SAMHSA. But what's nice about it is that they are great at disaggregating our data. And so now when we're sitting in these meetings and looking at what we have in San Marcos, what supports are going on, what other partnerships, and it could be across the district. So it's not just the 3 campuses. As we're running our behavioral screeners, they're willing to look at all of that data and going through them and seeing those patterns so that we can make data-driven decisions around mental health. South by Southwest. That's different. South, you guys are listening, that's good. Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, still a mouthful even the acronym. Also is another great resource, and it's more of a regional type of way. There's southwest locations, there's north, it's all over nationwide. So it really gives us the opportunity to do ongoing training for free with other people from around the world, around the state, around the United States. And so there's more of a different perspective taking that we can take there. We want to hone into what San Marcos CISD needs and all of that, but it's also good to hear other feedback from other places to have an informed conversation around these topics. And Region 13, Ms. Rosen, meets with me or meets with the team weekly. And so we've got a dedicated technical support person from Region 13 that talks about whatever needs we have, right? And it's almost the liaison. So the TEA people are like the liaison to SAMHSA. Region 13, Ms. Rosen's like the liaison to TEA. So we kind of have that buffering type of meeting so we can talk about that. One of a great perk that we got this year is that Region 13 has decided to use some of the AWARE grant funds, because they get funding as well, and they are providing the free services for like our counseling staff, our APs, anybody to do like the new counselor collaborative, to do the mental health series. And so, I mean, that's covering a lot of cost of that, and that's a nice little perk there too. Then finally on this page, the Cook Center for Human Connection is for our parent information. And so on this partner, it's really cool because, and spread the word to parents, that they can go to parentguidance.org. Should have put that on there. But parentguidance.org, and our families can go there and they can access different lessons to help themselves navigate through how to manage their children's own wellness and their own mental whatevers, right? Because it's a continuum. Additionally, at our AWARE campuses only currently, but at Bonham and at Rodriguez and at the high school, which mind you, we might have a Mendez student, but they might also have a high school student, so it still works, right? So at those 3 campuses, our parents can sign up for 6 free sessions of their own care. So they can ask questions about what they're going through personally. They can ask about what their child's going through and navigating it. It's all anonymous. It's all free. I mean, our district is sponsoring that, but it's free to them. And they have that opportunity. They can also do something there called Ask a Therapist, and they can ask a question anonymously, and then they will get an answer back, or they can see the different boards. So it's a great tool. What I want to share with our teachers, in our faculty meetings, is that when a parent is facing them in a parent conference, and their parent is just upset and doesn't know what to do, and then our teachers reply back with, "I don't know either," now they don't have to say that. So that's a pretty neat thing. Okay, so our current actions. So as I've talked about many of these and the development of getting to this point, but clearly we're trying to look at different systems, policies, procedural development, matching what we currently have in place and starting that conversation. One of the goals is at the bottom, it says to develop mental health teams. So it's not just the one person, like Ms. Guerrero said earlier, and it's not in silos, and some of us are having the conversations, we're not talking to each other. So developing that so that we can look at these different things more specifically and really finite our systems. Ms. Hernandez has developed a district-wide resource map. It is digital, and as well, we can do it paper-based, but it's up to date, it's current, it's going to be constantly active, so that way, once again, capacity to our teachers. They can say, I know I know something to give you, right? And really having that streamlined. Awareness campaigns, including a mental health fair, are where we are in this part of the years of the grant. It's getting the information out, so thanks again for letting us be here, because that's step 1 of this, and doing different things. So it's going to be campus-based, district-based, we'll have just different ways, but also partnering with other people, right? So as we have the STEAM fair that's very popular in our district, is having some things that align with that when it's around that. And the key piece of this part is teaching our families and hopefully breaking down stigma, that when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about wellness. And teaching that maybe at the STEAM fair, it's a place where you could go also just to have some yoga and deep breathing, right? We're not talking about always the scary topics that are sometimes hard to bring up. And then we've talked about the curriculum, and so that goes to our community and family and education piece of it. So it's going to be really important, specifically with Ms. Escamilla. I know that's been a lot of her work, is talking with families and starting there. because the 4-year-olds are just crying right now. That's all they're doing. So as I mentioned before, the goal is to talk about our tiers and really get that as familiar language to everybody. And so I spoke briefly about the SHAPE assessment, and I wrote it down, what it means, but I lost that page. So SHAPE means something. I think it's school health, and then you guys can fill in the blanks. But they have a mental health assessment that we started last year within this grant project and looked at what we have in place. And so we were able to see what things we are doing really well and in areas in which we need to have some growth. And then we can continually look at that. That's when this mental health team will come into better play. I had some members from our district team look at that. I invited a parent member. We invited Ms. Lopez from Community Action. So we had some outside people in to check this out and to really talk about it. But the goal is to have a plan, an action plan, and data driven. And what through this Project Aware and the access to SHAPE, that gives us a platform to do that, which is nice. Additionally, in this district, we're going to do behavior screeners, and that's incorporating our LSSPs and then really bringing in other partnerships with other professionals on this campus to help us look to see what that information is telling us. But then it goes down to the level of teaching our educators and our principals and our families about what externalizing and internalizing behavior looks like. What does this even mean, right? And so creating those spaces for that. And then using the information to decide where we need to go to help our students. So MTSS training, CHAMPS, discipline in the secondary classroom. We've got so many great programs that are in place that are partnerships together, right? This is not just in its own little world. And then dedicated time in the PLCs, and so I've talked about most of that. And I'm going to go quickly through this slide, but we've talked about some of the professional opportunities that are available, and this is just a quick review of some things. Like youth mental health first aid, I was grateful that I was able to be trained as a trainer, so I can provide that to our staff, our students. It's for adults working with youth. The teen mental health first aid is something that we can partner with our local mental health authority, and that's teens working with teens. We have programs in place through our campuses, like a check-in and check-out process, conscious discipline, zones of regulation, PACS, good behavior gain. Those are all classroom modeling systems to put in place, and we can consult with teachers to do that. So that's part of our work there. And then we've got some just different trainings like the Ask and Assist training. Some of the harder topics we can bring in professionals to help really mitigate that conversation. So I believe this is my last slide. Just kidding. So, okay, look, I put parent guidance. We put parentguidance.org on there. But I want to point out that we are going to be intentional about the different things, and that's that proactive approach about thinking about where we're going to go with specifics around this. And for this purposes of it, I wanted to point out that like in October and in February, October 1st, we're having a parent meeting, a parents' educational session on bullying, and it's going to be a virtual type of session, and so the parents can log in and they can choose to stay anonymous in that space, but it's just built for San Marcos CISD, and that's partnerships with our Cook Center for Human Connection. They're providing that. Then we're going to do de-escalating conflicts in February, and so we're trying to be very mindful about what's coming up and why to play certain things in certain ways so that it makes sense to our families. And then at the end of the year, we've got a mental health wellness fair. The date's still pending. But even partnerships like with Mr. Underwood, I spoke with him to have his fine arts people or his art people create different art about like their feelings and their wellness, and then we can present it there. So our families want to come see. So there's a connection to what this is as a whole person. It's not just one topic, not in isolation. And then the last thing I would say is that Be the Change Youth Training Program. It is a partnership with our with Community Action, but this is a way and another way to empower our students. They can be part of different training types of things and conference type of learning, and giving them a voice with that. And so I think that that's an important place to go as well. So that's it. Any questions? Yes.
Dr. Salmi?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. It's very thorough. I had a couple of questions specifically about the AWARE grant. What's the term of that grant and where are we in it?
Good question. So the grant is 5 years, and this is technically year 3. The first year of the grant, SAMHSA's funding was held a little bit, and so the understanding is that they will tack it on to another additional year. So we're looking through 2026. Is that right? 2025. Do math. Yes. So I have to answer that.
Fantastic. I had just one more question about the assessment and behavior screeners that you mentioned and the Tier 1 district supports. Are those being given to all San Marcos ISD students?
So yeah, it would be a universal screener, yes, and it would be based on a teacher rating, so observations and any other data to consider. So
And-
the student would not take it, it would be based on teacher.
Okay, and is that something that is like looked at it multiple times throughout the year? Is that a
Yes,
sort of?
correct, we will.
Okay. Will we get results from those studies?
Yes.
I would like
and so, yes, and we have training actually this upcoming Friday for our staff who will
Okay.
help lead that initiative, and so that we can help support any other questions that, our teachers may have throughout this process.
Wonderful. I look forward.
It's new, it's fairly new. I know last year, I think it was done at some campuses, it was piloted really. So this year, we're hoping to complete this process so that we're all aware and can help our kiddos with Tier 1 or Tier 2 supports.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mr. Shanks?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions for you. So with COVID, we noticed, with isolation, we noticed an increase in mental health issues with our children. And I was wondering, you talked about data several times, and I was wondering, are we tracking where our mental health, I guess, where we were at with our kids and mental health right after COVID? And we have a lot of great programs, it sounds like, that we're implementing. Are our kids getting stronger and more resilient? And do we have data that kind of backs that up? Because several times you said we're tracking data. I'm just curious what kind of data we're tracking. How many students are we focusing on, and are we making ground with them? Are they going on? Are behavior problems going down? Are grades going up with some of these children? Do we actually have data like that? And I'd love to see some of it.
Absolutely. So our campuses have PLC, RTI, or MTSS, meetings where they're constantly talking about student progress in the areas of academics, behavior, right, or social emotional needs, as well as attendance. So that's been ongoing always, right? COVID, I agree, there were definitely, we saw an increase in social emotional needs and differences. And so I can't speak to the data from before, but I can tell you that every year there's always been administrators and RTI or MTSS committee that is tasked with that responsibility of looking at all student needs with all those different areas, academics, behavior, attendance, discipline, to consider what comes next. How do we help this child? And have we exhausted all our intervention supports? Have we referred for community support or other mental health services?
So is there a report that you could send to the trustees that kind of shown some of this data that y'all have collected to show which programs are being more successful and stuff like that?
So Communities and Schools, for example, has a metric where they look at all state assessment data, attendance, et cetera, for students who have been served. And so I can certainly get that information to provide, and so that would be for last year. And then you can speak to Project Aware.
So Project Aware does have the ability to do that. In the past year, it was more of the implementing and developing the program, and it was honestly just me providing services. So I do have a little bit of data from the students that I was able to meet with last year, and they do collect that. And so as that time goes on and we have those quarterly reports, I'm happy to provide that information back to you, because that is also information that SAMHSA is asking for us to show, and to track to see if the program is working, or if we need to change services, or to do those things. So I'm happy to track that. And I know additionally, just speaking maybe out of turn, sorry, but for the counseling team, I know that the procedures and policies that we're talking about is ways to collect our crisis situations on campus, and so developing some of those things. So we'll begin to have more of a data map to look at in the near future.
We also did the national behavior risk survey pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So those are good baselines to look at in terms of the way, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and now subsequently with the implementation of these various programs.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. That's a great idea.
And I would also ask that if we could have information about those online services that I think we've been offering this T-Chat for a couple of years now, and I'd love to know how many students and families are taking.
Yes, and we have that data to
Making use
share.
of that.
Absolutely.
And the Gear Up one as well. Thank you.
Sorry, I have a couple of questions. I wanted to follow up on a question from Dr. Salmes and about the screeners at the secondary level. So do I understand correctly that we're going to screen every student at the secondary level? And if so, how are we doing that? I understand how we can screen for elementary school kids, a student who's in the same classroom most of the day. I don't understand how that necessarily works at the secondary level.
So for secondary, we will have to meet with administrators to really formulate a plan for that. I agree. I think it's very different where our teachers have about 25 to 35 kiddos, and so our assessment window would definitely be longer in order to ensure that we can accommodate teachers as well, so that they can, be diligent in completing those rating skills. So I can certainly follow up and have more for you.
We do have a homeroom period at the high school that will be coming up in the next couple of weeks, and that will be an opportunity for us to utilize that time. And that's one of the reasons why we do have homeroom built in this year at various points throughout. And it is to make sure that we can get things like this done.
I think it's great. I just think it really presents a challenge, right? I even can see it in terms of, I know the morning meeting has been implemented in the middle schools for a couple of years, so that is something that students are more familiar with. I hope we can do it at the high school successfully. My other request is that we go back to the second slide, I think, the third one, what's the different columns, the services.
Oh, where?
That one, yes, thank you. And this is terrific. I mean, I think that it's remarkable how far we've come in just 5 years. And this is outstanding, and I'm so excited and so proud to be at this place and so grateful for all the work that you're doing, because this was not happening 5 years ago. And so I just want to make sure that I can decipher this correctly. 5 years ago, we didn't have a director of social and emotional learning. We do have that. We have you in place now.
Yes, and I'm excited.
We also, as far as I understand, we used to have one social worker for the entire district. And now, if I'm reading this correctly, through communities and schools, we have a social worker at every campus. Do I read this correctly? Is that how I interpret this?
So the social emotional learning counselors are secondary?
Social workers.
The social workers. Are communities and schools? So
communities and schools is not necessarily where they are licensed. They have a degree in something I think similar related into health services, and then it depends on how far they go, but that's not necessarily a requirement. So we can't make that statement that it is. I don't know off the top of my head about all the CIS members and what credentials they hold. Communities and schools does now employ 2 mental health counselors that do. Also support our schools, but they support multiple schools, so they're not housed on our campus.
Okay. So I guess what I would like to get at some point is a sort of a map of that. So I understand that communities and schools, even if they are not licensed social workers, are providing wraparound services that are in the same vein. So I'd like to understand how many are actually certified social workers and the other degrees there. And then I know that we used to have an academic counselor at every campus. And oftentimes that academic counselor was also responsible for the social emotional counseling. And so is that still happening at the elementary school? Where are we at in terms of the number of people providing services?
So they do both.
Okay.
Yes, currently.
So I'd like to get sort of an update from y'all on a follow-up on that. So the number of social workers, the number of wraparound services, and including whether or not that's happening at the Lamar and Phoenix campuses as well, for both social workers and for emotional counselors. And I think the fact that I think 10 years ago we attempted to start a program where we had licensed counselors on some campuses, and it just didn't work. And I'm glad that we are bringing that back, and I'm glad that we are really investing in that program to make that work. So if we could just get sort of a tally of that, I think that would be terrific. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I had the same concern, because we've come a long way with all of these programs, and the kids are the ones that are benefiting. but we can't forget the parents, because a lot of times I know parents feel like they need some direction, especially in the middle school.
We also have through SHAC a subcommittee for SEL that'll focus on a parent series to help facilitate those conversations.
And then I know we have a proclamation to read tonight. Shall I go ahead? I'll go ahead and do that. Okay. This is a proclamation for Suicide Awareness Month. Whereas, with September being recognized as Suicide Awareness Month, the National Suicide Prevention and Action Month proclamation was created to raise the visibility of mental health and proactive suicide prevention resources in our community, which also includes National Suicide Prevention Week, beginning with World Suicide Prevention Day on September 10th, a moment in time in which we rally the public to create awareness of this leading cause of death and inspire more and more people to learn how they can play a role in their communities in helping save lives. We want to start the conversation, destigmatize it, and help connect people with the appropriate support services. And whereas, according to NAMI, CDC, and NIMH, suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 14, and the third leading cause of death among people ages 15 to 24 in the U.S., 46% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosed mental health condition. Whereas, according to NAMI, CDC, and NIMH, the prevalence of serious thoughts of suicide greatly impact our youth in the U.S., specifically 11.3% of young adults ages 18 to 25, 18.8% of high school students, and 45% of LGBTQ youth in the U.S. Whereas, City of San Marcos, Hays County State publicly places its full support behind the Core 4 partnership, City of San Marcos, Hays County, San Marcos CISD, Texas State University, the San Marcos, Texas Mental Health Coalition, and its members who work in the field of mental health, education, and law enforcement. And whereas community organizations like Senacor Foundation, Greater San Marcos Youth Council, Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, NAMI Central Texas, Communities and Schools of Central Texas, Hill Country MHDD centers, along with other organizations, local mental health providers, serve on the front lines and see the impact of suicide and work to reduce the stigma, provide resources, support, and provide education to the City of San Marcos, Hays County. And whereas we encourage all residents to take time to understand mental health through education by actively participating in mental health first aid training, assist suicide prevention training, youth awareness of mental health training, and other opportunities to increase education and awareness in Hays County. Recognize that we need to take care of our mental health while we take care of each other, and therefore, the San Marcos CISD Board of Trustees do hereby proclaim September 2023 as Suicide Prevention and Action Month. Thank you. Let's see. And now we are going to finish our academic report with an academic priorities update. Ms. Nash, please.
Good evening, Board President Cantu, Dr. Cardona. I'm here with our A3F update for the month of September. There were some changes that came out on Tuesday of last week. So there are some slight modifications in this presentation from your board book. The first thing you'll find in your board book on pages 27, 28, and 29 is a resource that will get referenced throughout the presentation. That's just something to have. And then you do have a copy of the presentation. I'll highlight the changes that I've made to the presentation, what's in your board book. But this evening, we'll be looking at A3F updates going domain by domain based on what we know currently. We'll be looking at how the district rating methodology has been updated and the impacts of that. We'll be looking at the what if information and scores I believe the board learned about over the summer at a training that all of you attended. And then lastly, important dates as we have them currently. We're getting into the A3F update by domain. I am using a resource that's through Lead Forward. They're one of our partners that works heavily with accountability. And this was a presentation they developed actually to roll out to educators, teachers, those that don't spend day in and day out living in the data like some of us. And this was published on August the 1st, and up until Tuesday of last week, this was all current. But it still does a really good job because even with the updates that are happening, it doesn't affect the entire accountability system, only one portion of it. So this is the Accountability Quick Look. This is the guide you have in your board book. I refer to it as the Pac-Man chart just because of the first page of it. But the top row of this shows accountability for elementary and middle school campuses. And then the second row shows the breakdown for how the high school is rated, just at a big global picture. Okay. And this is proposed still because we still do not have the updated manual for the 2023 school year. So looking at accountability, it's still the better of how did students do on either growth or performance. And when we mention performance, it's how did students do on this year's test versus growth is comparing students on how they did on this year's test to how they did on last year's test in a lower grade level of the same subject. And you'll see that performance is going to be notated in orange and the growth will be shown in green. That's kind of a theme throughout the presentation. So looking more closely, 70% of the overall rating is based on the better of growth or performance. And that's something I've hit on, I feel, in every accountability presentation that I've been in or I've presented, and that's not changing. That will still be the case moving forward. And then the final 30% is based on domain 3, and that does get a little bit more detailed, and that one is significantly different from elementary and middle school to the high school ratings. So it's still a strength-based system. So for elementary and middle school, if growth is the best thing that they do, growth comes out to 85% of their score. And that's why it is so important that every single student show a year's growth, that our master's students continue to perform at masters, our meets students stay at meets or move up, our students who are at approaches maintain approaches or ideally move up to meets and masters. And for our students that did not meet on the STAR test last year, they are ideally moving up into that approaches range, but they can still actually stay in the did not meet and still receive growth points. And then at the high school level, growth can be 70%. So it's not as high as the elementary and middle school, but it's still something to keep in mind. And growth now, we're looking at RLA and math, fourth grade all the way through English 2, whereas math growth is calculated starting in fourth grade through Algebra 1. And growth is calculated for high school, or for EOC on the first time testers. For English 1, English 2, and Algebra 1, students who are retaking our EOCs do not receive a growth score. So getting into domain 1, this is an area that did not change from 2022, and it's not expected to change. So we have our performance levels that did not meet, approaches, meets, and masters. And typically the way that we're used to seeing the scores is there's a percentage who are at approaches grade level or above. So you'll see that includes our students at meets and our students at masters. Then the meets grade level shows meets grade level or above. So once again, we're not going to have percentages that all add up to 100 because there are students who duplicate within these groups. And then finally, that master's grade level is just the students who are at masters. To calculate this for domain 1, you just simply take the number of tests at approaches, plus the number of tests at meets, plus the number of tests at masters, divide it by the total, or add it together, divide it by 3, and that gives us a domain score. That then gets scaled on a scale of 0 to 100, which correlates to that A through F. So for STAR performance, there was no change in how it was calculated, and there was no change in the scaling of it. So if it scaled to an A last year, it would be an A this year. So domain 1 has stayed the same for STAR performance. Looking at CCMR, this is a big one that has impacted every single high school across the state and has really kicked off all of the lawsuits you're seeing in the news. Because CCMR, as you know, is a lagging indicator. It is based on our students who've graduated, who have left us. And with the state changing the metrics last year throughout the school year, that impacted students that had graduated in May, when we're just now getting the updates in August. So looking at CCMR for the high school level, it does make up 40% of domain 1. And the big change is not really on how it is being, there we go. So there's no change really in how it's being calculated, with the exception of there is a limit being placed on the industry-based certifications that are considered sunsetting programs. And those are the ones that are on their way out, that they're no longer going to be receiving credit for those. And so they've limited those to either 5 graduates or 20% of all graduates. That really does not have a large impact on our district at all. But the issue with CCMR is how they are now scaling it. So 2018 through 2022, a score of a 60 equaled an A. Now to receive an A, you have to score an 88. So you can see the vast difference in what had been the targets to now what is expected to get an A, B, C, and D. So that is where the extreme change is coming from. And this 40% that's in Domain 1 also impacts Domain 2, and it also impacts Domain 3. So for our high school campus in particular, this is a really big impact. And like I said, it's not just for our high school, it's across the entire state. So once again, the change in calculations, very small changes in how it's being calculated, but the change in the grading scale is humongous, and it makes a huge difference on the overall score. Graduation rate is another area that's stayed relatively the same. Graduation rate makes up 20% of Domain 1 for high schools. And looking at the change with how it's rated, for our high school, we still look at the better of 4, 5, or 6-year graduate status, and that is the number that gets used. So there's no change in how it's being calculated, but there are some slight changes in the scaling of it. To receive an A previously, you had to have a 96% graduation rate. Now to receive an A, it's a 98. So it's slightly more rigorous, but not too big of a jump right here. But that is the change on how graduation rates are being impacted for the proposed accountability system. So once again, no changes in how it's calculated, slight change with it being slightly more rigorous in the scaling.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
On this topic, is the graduation rate only the 4-year graduation, or do they include 5 and 6?
This is still 4, 5, and 6 year. The best of those three gets used.
The best of those.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I have a question also. So I thought that the proposed change was going to be retroactively imposed on the class of 22, but this looks like the scale is changing for the most recent graduation class 2023. Is that correct?
Well, yes, because this is CCMR is the lagging indicator. Graduation rate, we look at, it can be the ones who just graduated in 2023, the ones who were 5-year graduates in 2022, or the 6-year graduates in 2021. So we're looking at 3 cohorts of students, and the best of those 3 is what gets used.
The best of those 3?
For
Correct.
graduation.
For graduation rates?
Yes.
Okay.
Academic growth is where things get a little tricky because that's what the state announced on Tuesday. They're putting a pause in the system because they've realized the targets that they used to set their goals they're not realistic. They were setting goals based on what we saw from students when they performed the year we came back being half remote back in person to the growth we saw the year the students were in person for the entire year. And this is a direct quote that came from the letter that was announced on Tuesday. Essentially, it didn't incorporate the fact of how much COVID-19 played on that. So as a result, they are delaying the ruling so they can do further analysis to set cut points that will impact growth data, which impacts Domain 2A academic growth and Domain 3 closing the gaps. That's all we've been given. So these next slides are showing how growth was planning to be calculated. And they may still follow the same growth measure, but they may scale it differently. Or they may change up everything, and we have no idea yet. So I'm going to show what's been our train of thought since November of last year, because it's stayed consistent since then. There's been no changes whatsoever until this came out on Tuesday. So quite the shock for us, but I believe it will be helpful for us because it will point us in an upward direction. So looking at growth, it's that green Pac-Man circle going all the way down. Every single campus level has it for one of their areas of accountability. Okay. And looking at the plan for growth, so it's based on, there's now 2 portions for growth. There is the annual growth, and then there's the House Bill 4545 performance. The commissioner was very adamant that he wanted in some way, somehow, House Bill 4545 students to have an impact on accountability. Those are the students who for the past year have had that accelerated instruction based on how they performed on STAR the previous year. So this is where the students will be included, and they will be included as a bonus measure. So they can't hurt the scores, they can only help the scores. But this does allow us to see how did our campuses perform with those students who struggled the year before, how many of those students now passed in 2023. And then the overall growth score is used on that grading scale of 0 to 100. Once again, on your quick look that you have, it's that middle section towards the bottom of all those colored tables. I'll get into it a little more detailed, but there is the actual annual growth, and then there is the 4545 performance. So looking at the transition table, you'll notice that there's more columns and rows than previous because at the did not meet grade level and the approaches grade level, there's now a high and a low breakdown of each of those. the color coding that's appearing right now, if a student is in the green, there's 1 full point for growth. If they're in the blue, they earn a half a point for growth on that test. If they're in a red, they earn 0 points for growth. The dark blue boxes show those performance levels that have been broken into, so we can really see more specific information on the students. And so looking at the House Bill 4545, it's that exact same table, but only looking at the top 2 rows. Because at this one, we only want to look at the students who did not meet grade level last year. And now this year, did they perform at least approaches or higher? If they did get us at approaches or higher, they earn bonus points. So how do they work together? Our campuses will receive something along these lines. On your handouts, you can hopefully see all the numbers that appear here. When we actually receive the data files, we can click in and see, well, who are my 13 students who are right here? Or who are these 14 students that can go up just slightly? And so we can get very, very granular with the data and really see each and every student on how they performed. And then same thing down here. Once again, these 2 rows here at the bottom are the exact same information as these 2 rows here at the top. Once again, it's students who have 2 years of assessments in a row. We know that we have some students who refuse to test, or parents will say opt out. We know opting out's not really an option because there is no opt out. But the students who refuse to test, they're actually not included on the growth because the state realizes a 0 score is not something that's appropriate to calculate growth for. And something else that is new with growth this year is students who took an assessment last year in Spanish and have taken it in English this year, they now do receive a growth score, whereas in years past, the growth score was not calculated. And now there's also a growth score calculated going from grade 8 reading to English 1. Previously, there had not been a growth score because the tests were so different, but now with this new transitional table, they are able to calculate growth, so more students now get a growth score than ever. So looking at the breakdown along the right-hand side, you have annual growth, and then the 45-45 performance. We'll get into more detail in just a moment on these, where you can actually see them. But going down vertically, you have the 2022 performance. Going across the top horizontally, you have 2023. You essentially grid your kids to see where were they last year, where are they this year. They go into one of those squares. You then essentially look to see how many tests do you have in the red. Those are the tests that earn you 0 points. How many tests do you have that are in the blue? Those students earn you a half point. How many tests are in the green? Those tests earn a full point. To do the math on it, you just take the total number of points divided by the total number of tests, and you receive an academic growth score. That's part 1 of the growth. Part 2 is going to be looking at the 45-45 students. So same thing here, we're looking at the total number of tests in red, those are 0 points. Number of tests in green, those are 1 point apiece. Doing the math on that, total number of points divided by the total number of tests, that gives you your performance score. So here we can see campus by campus, once our scores come out, which campuses did a really great job with those 45-45 kids, providing that intervention to get those students who had not passed previously to that passing level or higher. And then looking at the points as they come together. So we would take the part from part A, and then the 45 performance, which is part B, and we're going to be combining those. So the number of points from A gets brought down. Now the 45-45 kiddos, those points come in at a quarter value each. So while there were 28 points earned, when multiplied by 0.25, it's only 7 points added in. Once you have your total points, you still divide by the same number of tests from the initial score. And you can see the academic growth score is now a 67. Without the House Bill 45-45 points, they had a 63. So those students, their performance helped that school jump 4 points from a 63 to a 67. So those students can make a big difference with accountability.
So are they included in both of these technically, because they're in the first box and then also drawn out the second time?
Yes, those students would have earned a full point in the top portion and then a quarter point in the bottom portion. So some students could have earned 2.5 points total for growth. So for the students where we had that really great high quality intervention provided, that's where we have certain campuses who did very well with this.
Thank you.
What number of students are we talking about on that growth? Total number of students. I know this is a point system and these are averaged.
It varies campus by campus. With elementary, you're only looking at their 4th and 5th graders who would even be included, whereas middle schools have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So middle schools, you would expect almost their entire student body would be included. Off the top of my head, I don't have the numbers, but once we have the official, we can get very detailed reports to the board if that's what you would like to see, and we can highlight, that what was the overall growth versus the 45-45 growth, so you can see the schools that did really well.
So just to be clear, this is our estimate, this is our assumptions based on what we know right now. It may be different when we get the final results.
This is a canned presentation. These numbers are from that.
Okay.
They're not from one of our schools.
They are not our school numbers.
Correct.
Got it. One other question, the tabulation table model, transition table model for annual growth. Students who meet grade level and continue to meet grade level don't earn 1 point, but if they move up to master's, it's the same?
Correct,
There's
yes.
not an incentive to move to the highest level?
Yes, you do not get multiple points for moving multiple for performance levels. It's either 0, half a point, or 1 point.
That's interesting.
Yes. So academic growth, the visual that they used is essentially the House Bill 45. 45 performance is icing on the cake. It's not going to hurt a campus, but it can help the campuses. And then what does it take to earn an A for academic growth? Down below, you can see what was used in 2017 through 2022 to earn an A through a D. You can see that the proposed ratings are slightly more rigorous, and that's something that once we receive the updated information, I suspect will look different, or they will have completely overhauled how growth was calculated to even begin with. So that's what was being proposed, and once this TEA ran all the numbers, they put a pause in things to reevaluate the system. Looking at relative performance, this was another one. There wasn't any change for elementary or for middle school. Relative performance is domain 2B. And for elementary and middle school, it's essentially just taking your domain 1 score and cross-referencing it with your school's eco-dis population or percentage that was reported at snapshot. For the high school, it is being calculated differently this year. At the high school, previously, they would average together star performance and CCMR and then cross-reference it. Now they're doing them separately and averaging them together. So they're still combining both pieces, but the math comes out a little bit different, and that's something we'll be able to see on the what if report. So here's an example of kind of how to visualize that. But there's these 2 red dots where these students, there's the same student achievement level. And you can see the color coding shows the A through F. Then along your bottom axis, you have your eco-dis population. So as your eco-dis percentage goes up, the letter colors come down to make it more achievable to earn an A, a B, a C, or a D. And this is an area where some of our campuses that have a very high eco-dis population, but they also do very well on that Tier 1 instruction, do perform well. But this is just showing you the graphic of this campuses have the exact same student achievement. One campus is going to be an A, one campus is going to be an F. And then domain 3, closing the gaps. This is the one that has had a lot of revisions made to it, and it was already the most confusing to begin with. But this one counts as 30% for all schools across the board. Elementary and middle school are calculated one way, high school is calculated a different way. So looking at this, and it's really small up here, one of the big things about domain 3 is they've reduced the minimum size criteria. For a student group to be included previously, you had to have at least 25 tests for that group to be included. Now they've dropped it down to 10. So now we have more student groups whose information is being included. Another thing for domain 3 is that they've reduced the number of groups who could possibly be evaluated. So previously you could be evaluated on up to 14 groups. Now it's just 4. What we're looking at is all students. We have a high focus group, and then the other 2 groups are based on the lowest ethnicity groups from last year's STAR. So for some campuses, it is Hispanic and African American that get looked at. For other campuses that have very small populations, it's Hispanic and white, but it's based on last year's data. The proposed changes, there's also a change for EL proficiency. And this is a change that's, we'll get into in another one, but reducing the minimum size criteria from 25 to 10. They've also set targets that are the current year, which are referred to as the interim targets. versus the next interim targets. And then they have very lofty targets to 2037 and 2038, 14 years from now. So, but they've got targets set for us. And they've also changed it from a yes-no methodology to a graded outcome. So previously it was either you earned the point or you didn't. Now it's on a scale of 0 to 4. So campuses can earn partial credit in certain areas. And if you meet the current interim target, that would earn you a 3. If you meet the long-term target, that gets you a 4. If you're showing growth, it gets you a 2. If you're showing growth but it's minimal, you have a 1. And if you went backwards, you have 0 points. And then once again, the groups that are evaluated, all students make up a group. You have your two lowest race ethnicity groups from the previous year, and then your high focus group, And high focus group includes our EcoDis students, our special ed, our emergent bilinguals, our homeless, our migrant, our foster. Previously, all of these groups were individual groups, meaning a student could count across that one group 3 different times. Now they may qualify for that group in 3 different ways, but their score only counts once. So this is something that does help us now so that our students don't duplicate across the board. So they would be included once for all students, once potentially for their race, and then once for the high focus, but 3 is better than 6 for this. There is an update for EL proficiency. In addition to all the STAR changes this year, TELPUS also changed, and the writing component was online for the first time. And initially the state said that with writing being online, we're not going to include that for accountability. We were just going to look at the 3 other domains, which are listening, speaking, and reading. And out of those 3, if a student has made growth or has maintained advanced high in 2 of the 3, the student will have shown growth. But as the update that came out on Tuesday, now they've decided they're going to include writing because statewide, writing was a very high score for a lot of schools. So now if students show growth on 2 of the 4, then we will have earned growth for proficiency. Before this came out, several of our campuses earned 3 points for EL proficiency. I need to go back and do the math now with adding in the writing component to see how that bumps this. EL proficiency makes up 3% of the school's overall accountability. So if a school is right there on the border of a letter, this can be a game changer. So here is the overall updates showing the changes in calculations versus the changes in grading or scaling. This is a good reference point to have between now and whenever TEA releases the final update. The next thing is the district ratings. There is a disconnect across the state that district scores don't always connect with the school scores. This is a portion of a presentation from TEA directly. And you'll see the 2 examples. The example on the top, the district earned a score of an 80, and they're considered a B-rated district, but none of their campuses are a B. You've got 3 Ds and 3 Cs. The example down below, they're an A-rated campus, but their 2 campuses, they have a B and a C. So how does the math add up? So the state realized there was a disconnect with approximately 30% of districts across the state, so they have re-examined the calculations. And what they're doing now is they're going to be looking at a weighting system based on student enrollment. So looking at students enrolled in grades 3 through 12, they're looking at grades 3 and up because those are the students who are involved in either STAR testing or they're involved with CCMR, graduation. So for our elementaries, it's only a portion of their students. For secondary, it's the entire campus. But we look at the number of students that were enrolled, divide it by the district's enrollment for 3 through 12, find a weight for that campus, and then essentially each of the domains that campus's score is multiplied by their weight. All of it is added up to create our district score. Looking at how do our campuses impact accountability, here are our campuses and their enrollment from last year's snapshot. So you can see how the campuses will impact the overall district accountability. 41% from the high school, 30% from the middle schools combined, and the remaining 28% comes from the elementary campuses. Next thing we have is what if. This is something I think Dr. Salmi asked me about over summertime, and I was ready to share. And so I have some information, and with everything else that's changing, this will probably also change. But the what if is very important to understand because TEA has even come out and said it's not an apples to apples comparison this year, and we've got to get ahead. And it's possible that a campus who had an A last year and the kids improved in 2023 may receive a B this year, and that's reality. And that's been the hard thing to have to explain to our principals and our teachers that yes, your data is improving, you're doing good things, but here's your projected score, and I think it's going to be lower. That's the hard conversation to have. So TEA put together the what if report, and it's running the 2022 data through the 2023 methodology to show, had the 2023 methodology been put in last year, what would the scores have been? And once again, these are all preliminary. They've been released to us, and we feel it's important that the board is aware of what are the what if scores. And once we do receive final ratings, the what if report will be posted onto the texasschools.gov website. It does not replace the 2022 score, but gives us a better comparison point. And this is what it will look like. Similar to this is over there on the right-hand side. You'll see they've added in a row of that 21, 22 what if, with that little disclaimer down below, and then they'll have that 22, 23 score on top. So we'll have that for comparison. But here are our what if ratings. As a district, we dropped 13 points. Once again, this is taking the exact same data from 2022, running it through the 2023 framework. And that's in large part because of CCMR and how much that scaling changed. The high school drops 15 points.
Do you understand the rationale for the giant change in CCMR? I understand somewhat the change for the growth component, right? I disagree with it, but I understand. But I don't understand what the rationale is with CCMR.
I personally feel that too many schools were achieving the A, and the scores were where we wanted them to be, and the state decided to set loftier expectations since we already met the goals that they essentially set out in the 60 by 30, which was their plan that by 2030, 60% of all graduates would have earned a college degree. And that's where that 60 came from initially, with it a 60 equaled an A. Well, schools have been working towards that, and growth has been happening towards CCMR. And that was something that it was a shocker to everyone with seeing the impacts that it has. So I'm curious to see what happens. I know there are a lot of lawsuits that are going around CCMR specifically with the impact it does have, especially since it is that lagging indicator that we don't have a chance to change our practices when they change the targets middle of the year. So that's all that I know. They really haven't shared much more than that.
So they gave us an assignment, and then we did it, and we completed it successfully, and then they said, sorry, we're changing the assignment, here's something different.
That's 100% what they did.
Yes.
We have a superintendent conference call every Thursday at 3 o'clock, and some of these members have had the pleasure of sitting with me and them. And this came directly from the Commissioner of Education, that because the state met the governor's goal 7 years before, he was unilaterally going to change the metrics on CCMR a year after the kids graduated. And Beth is very nice in not casting aspersions about anybody, but yeah, it was purposely changed a year after. And for the better part of the last 2 years, superintendents across the state have been telling the commissioner, you're getting ready to make a huge mistake, and you're going to create a lot of issues for our communities. So for us, CJ has done a lot of work with the CTE teachers. They've done some amazing work, and in 1 year we went from 160 kids getting industry-based certifications to 260 something, I think, by the end of August. So 100 more kids. The year before went from 80 to 160. Those metrics all went out the door. And as you know, when you earn industry-based certification, there's, cosmetology has 1,000 hours of work to do. Everybody has contact hours. Then there's a certification test. I think it's just done without thinking about kids and communities. I'll say it for you, Beth.
Thank you. So you can see the what if ratings. I did provide to you in the board book an actual breakdown showing the what if versus the actual. So this is the example of San Marcos High School from page 89, side by side. On the left-hand side, we have their actual score. So we have under STAR student achievement, there was a score of 73, which equaled a C. And within that, you can see STAR performance is a 37 for the raw score, CCMR is a 54, and graduation rate's a 91.1. Moving to the right-hand side, underneath raw score, you'll see that 37, 54, and 91.9 are still there, but now it scales to a 63 because of the change with CCMR. where our CCMR had been scaled to an 85, now it only scaled to a 62. So that's how Domain 1 changed for high school. Looking at Domain 2, which is school progress, previously you've got academic growth was a 67 for raw score, which scaled to a 76. Well, now under 2023, growth was now a 63 because more students received a growth score now, and that 63 scaled down to a 59. And then relative performance on the left-hand side, you only have one row of information. It's at 46. That's because they combined the STAR performance with CCMR, and then they scaled it. They cross-referenced it with our ECODIS population. On the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a separate line for STAR performance, which is that 37. It's the same 37 from up above. That 37 scaled to a 69. And the CCMR, which is the same 54 from above, now scales to a 66. So relative performance, which had been an 80 on the left-hand side, now scales to a 68. Lastly, you'll see that Domain 3, closing the gaps, it had been a raw score of a 31, which scales to a 71. Now the raw score is a 24, which scales to a 49. So this is just an example of how to read this, but I wanted to highlight the high schools. They have the most moving pieces involved. The elementaries and middle schools are easier to look at and understand. But this just shows with the exact same student data, our high school drops from a 77 to a 62. That's without the STAR redesign, that's without the new item types, that's without the TEAC changes. So I'm just wanting to prepare everyone for what's going to be coming out here in a month or so, give or take, and just hope that whatever changes they make in growth are advantageous for the entire state, because I know we're not the only district in this position. So important dates moving forward. We're still waiting for some point for the fall accountability manual. And then we're going to be receiving the information the last week of September. Now they've told us it will be late October, early November. This one will be receiving the scores, and we will receive specific dates about 2 weeks prior to the actual release of public ratings. So as we have more information, I'm sure it will be very publicly announced, but that's what we're looking at currently right now. So until more updates are shared, that is all that I know currently. Thank you all for asking questions throughout the presentation. It was very lengthy. Are there any other questions at this time?
I do have one more question. I know that our District of Innovation designation is dependent on our A through F rating. Is there going to be accommodation made for the change in, do we know anything about how our District of Innovation would be affected?
Currently, we do not know. We probably think it'd be like our schools. They'll give us a grace period to say, we'll give you the support and we'll look at you a year later.
Okay.
We hope.
But no decision.
No guarantees.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this and providing this information.
Yeah, Beth really needs to be thanked a lot because she's been going through all this a lot. And we, when I say we, Mr. Sanders, myself, have met with Mr. Nevades and Chanda with all school principals to have these conversations of support for our campuses. And the campus principals and teachers have a good grasp on this, of where they're at, but it is disappointing. They are disappointed because they've worked hard. They work hard, and we've shown a lot of growth in a lot of areas, only to be kind of kicked in the gut, with this. But we're going to keep supporting them, and it is what it is. We'll set the metrics, and then we'll move towards them.
I do have one more question. Will we be able to provide our own assessment of what our rankings would have been had the state not changed the metric midway?
Great question.
We do have preliminary projections, if they were to have released accountability here at the end of September, of where we would have anticipated our different schools being. So we do have that information, but that's all in-house calculations that were done based on the information we do have available to us. So we can see once they do share the updated information, how much did our schools potentially go up, or how minimal was the change, if any.
I think when you present the actual new format, I would like to know where we would be had they not changed the system. So doing the same thing that the state did with the what
going
if.
backwards.
Yeah, when you
Opposite.
take the 23 numbers and put them through the calculation that was in place in 22.
That part I do not have. We could look to see it doing it manually. Growth hasn't changed too tremendously. CCMAR would be fairly easy to calculate.
Mhm.
It would take some work. I could do that though manually if that's something the board would like to see, just to help give our narrative of where we would like to, where
I
we
think
would
it
have
would be
been.
valuable for our families to know that if the state hadn't changed the method of evaluation, we would be in a different place. And I think
agree.
the same way this provides us with that kind of information, knowing where we would have been with our
Yes.
23 numbers would be extremely valuable.
I can put it together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I also think that we need to make sure the community understands all that is going on and how it's affecting our rating, because when they start hearing the ratings, they're going to want to know, was it us or was it the state, or where are we? And so I think it's important that we get some good information out to the community and that we all sing the same song.
And I have, at our Central Texas Board meeting, we discussed all this, but thank you, Beth, because you presented it in a different manner, and it's hard to understand either way. But the analogy of somebody at Central Texas School Board meeting was that professors at the university give their syllabus at the beginning of the year and not at the end of the year. And this was the analogy, that this was what was happening. So I think we need to take that to the public. And find out exactly how it was worded, Glenn, because it's not me. I may not be getting it just right.
I think I wrote it down how they said it.
You did.
All right, if there aren't further questions, we'll move into our finance report. Mr. Doyle?
Good evening, Board. I have before you a brief update of our certified appraisal figures, which will transcend into later on in our board meeting when we get to the financial aspects of where we're adopting our tax rate. So you can see here a trend of our certified values beginning in 2020 through up and you'll see 23, and you'll see two figures of 23. And what I want to point out here is that in 23, you can see the column second to the right has 40K. So that's apples to apples. So this is prior to Senate Bill 2 passing. This would be our values if you compared it, or if we used our current $40,000 exemption. But keep in mind that Senate Bill 2 increased that exemption to $100,000, so you can see the difference in how that changed and impacted our overall values. We go from 2022 with roughly about a 13% increase in value to what we'll actually move forward with tonight under the precedence that Senate Bill 2 will pass in November. Our values are actually at that 9.8 figure. So speaking of Senate Bill 2, it did a variety of things for our taxpayers. It did increase our eligible homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000. It did increase or cause some compression, right? So that tax compression does not impact overall level of funding, but it does compress our M&O rate, our MCR rate. That tax compression only impacts the balance of the state and local share of the school district's total Tier 1 entitlement. We're still going to receive what we're owed, but it shifts the cost, if you will, away from taxpayers and back into TEA's contribution, if you will. And then last but not least, the Senate Bill 2 also directed TEA to reduce districts' maximum compressed tax rates, those MCR rates, by an additional 0.107. So you'll see here in a second that our M&O rate is considerably less than what we were anticipating before Senate Bill 2, which also causes our overall tax rate to be considerably less than what we were anticipating, especially when we were talking about the bond and the bond election in May. So looking briefly, our local property values, like I said, if you look at the apples to apples 22 to 23, if you're just going off the $40,000 exemption comparison, there was a 13% increase. If Senate bill wouldn't have, is not to pass, or we anticipate it to pass, our compressed tax rate, or M&O rate, would be 0.7272. But TEA has provided, again, that tax rate, that compressed M&O tax rate, you'll see that our growth is with that 100,000 exemption, only 8.64%, and our compressed tax rate is 0.6202. So continuing on, looking at those trends, you can see from 21, 22, and 23, that 23 actually in that column is anticipation of Senate Bill 2, the $100,000 exemption. You can see that our maximum compressed tax rate is that 0.6202 figure. We do have 6 golden pennies that have already been approved in years prior. So when you combine those two together, our total M&O rate is going to be 0.6802. That INS rate, our debt service rate, which we'll adopt based on what we informed voters back in May in our bond election, is 0.3113 for total tax rate that we anticipate to adopt tonight of 0.9915. And you can see the difference compared to 22, which was 1.13. So we had a considerable decrease. And that's all I have for that point.
Questions for Mr. Doyle? I think that this is terrific news for the taxpayers of San Marcos CISD, the fact that we have been able to finance a major reconstruction bill and drop the tax rate considerably. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Next, I do have Humberto Aguilera and Josh Haney. Humberto is bond counsel, and Josh is with Mo Casey. He's one of our reps who help us shape all of our finances and also bond financing. What you'll see later on this evening, you'll see a cash defeasance resolution, and I wanted to bring these two gentlemen forward to answer any questions as to why we're bringing this and how it came about. Yeah, both of you. Josh, you want to speak a little bit?
Sure. So I'm going to speak mostly on the truth and taxation parts of this, and then I'll let your bond counsel talk about sort of the mechanics of the resolution. But the controller requires, or statute requires, school districts to complete these really arduous worksheets every year to establish your no new revenue rate, your voter approval tax rate, all these calculations each year as part of your tax rate adoption process. We've long sort of had an issue with the way the controller lays out that form, and a number of things are sort of left off that. For example, you can't count your frozen collections towards that INS rate, and so for a number of reasons that we've brought up these issues with the controller's office. They continue to come out with the form as we had to use it today, or I'm sorry, this year. And so for that reason, we have to essentially overstate the amount of debt service that your district has. And that's really just to maintain the INS rate that you wish to adopt. And so that's really part of the rationale for a defeasance resolution, is just to cover, to provide coverage for the information that we put, that we're required to put in that controller worksheet to set your INS rate. So I know that was a lot, but I don't want to go too far in the weeds. I know you guys have had a long meeting already, but feel free to ask any questions about that if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Good evening, Board. Dr. Cardona, Humberto Aguilera with Escamilla and Ponick. Happy to be here this evening. So just following up on what Josh had to say there, so we've drafted the resolution that will be before the board later this evening to defease a certain portion of the district's outstanding debt. And again, that's just to essentially close the gap from what Josh and his firm have identified as necessary to support the INS tax rate. We have some built-in flexibility there with authorizing the board president, superintendent, or CFO individually or collectively to take a look once we get our tax receipts in. They can determine whether or not there's sufficient funds to actually execute that defeasance. So you're authorizing the defeasance, but you're delegating to those district representatives to actually execute it based on the availability of funds.
Has this has this process been necessary in years past?
Not for the district, to my knowledge, but
Is there what has changed that makes this necessary this year?
sure, I'll let probably Josh.
Part of the things that are causing this process to go a little haywire this year is, as Mike mentioned, Senate bill, the property tax relief and the compression and all that. The truth in taxation system wasn't really designed with tax compression in mind, and doesn't really play nice with tax compression. And so you get some unintended sort of results from that. And so that's part of the answer there.
Okay.
And then just also, you all have, a pretty quickly growing tax base. And so whenever you're maintaining that INS rate, for good reasons, pay down that debt early, save your taxpayers interest, all of that, that's whenever you're taking on those policies, that's going to often result in some sort of defeasance resolution.
Okay. Can someone up there give us a layman's explanation of what what a compressed tax rate means, please?
Yes. So essentially, as your values or any district's value increases, the percentage in which you can set your tax rate will shrink. We're not at the floor rate. TEA will set a minimum rate. This is how much you can set. You can't go any lower. When you factor in our $100,000 exemption, we're slightly above that. We're not at the floor, but again, as those values go up, they compress that tax rate. And what it does is it shifts that seesaw balance in what a school will receive in funding. We're going to get what we're owed, but it shifts from the taxpayer to TEA making that contribution.
And in the past, when we've done a defeasance, and I think we've done them 4 or 5 times, it only affects the INS tax rate. And we've done it when we could afford to pay off that tax rate at the appropriate level, and we would have collected additional revenue. So we returned it to the taxpayers because it, one, brought down the tax rate, but it also opened up the capacity for us to improve our bond rating and to improve our bond capacity.
Correct.
And so my assumption is that even if we approve this resolution tonight, that we wouldn't pass such a defeasance unless at which time it became necessary because of the changes to the law, or affordable to us in that way, right?
Yes, and I can speak to that a little bit. So the district has done defeasances in the past, just to clarify, but you're absolutely correct that those were identifying opportunities to pay down debt early, whereas this is more of a resolution, or resolving to, essentially cure this little change in discrepancy between the truth in taxation form. So this is a unique situation now, but it's a tool that the district has used, but the genesis of it is now different.
And so is it correct to understand that we would unlikely be in this situation next year because we will have made the adjustments necessary due to this new legislation? Is that a reasonable assessment, that we won't need this sort of safety net in the next?
That's correct. That's my assumption with things that iron out. For example, Senate Bill 2 is up for vote in November, so that'll be codified, if you will, in November. So we'll have actual figures, if you will. We won't have assumptions built in. Hopefully, Josh, the comptroller worksheet will get a little bit easier, but probably not. But I think it would, because of the uncertainty and how quickly Senate Bill 2 came to school districts, right as the time frame of values coming to school districts, appraisal districts didn't have the capacity, like Josh was saying, to make those switches so quickly, and it just kind of caused a lot of haywire for not just us, for multiple school districts.
And when will we know if this defeasance is actually going to be necessary? The payment needs to change, whatever.
Throughout the year, I don't have a certain date and time, but throughout the year, we'll be looking at our collections as they come in to see where they're at and how much we would if needed, to make that division payment.
Okay. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and request that unless anybody wants to pull any items out of the consent agenda, then if I can get a motion to approve the consent agenda items as listed, then we'll take a short 5-minute break after this vote.
President Hall.
Motion made by Ms. Cantu,
Second.
seconded by Dr. Salmi. Any questions, any discussion on the items for approval in the consent agenda? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the consent agenda items as presented, please raise your hand. All opposed? Terrific. It is now 7:54. We will reconvene at 8:01.
I could join the boss.
To be clear, this is what I expected when I signed up to do this, but I did church, Sunday school,
for action, and our first two items under that are to consider resolutions nominating candidates to the Board of Directors of the Caldwell County Appraisal District, and consider a resolution nominating candidates to the Board of Directors of the Guadalupe County Appraisal District. It is my understanding that we do not have any nominees for either of those appraisal districts, unless anybody here has somebody to present. Okay, so we are going to move forward without taking action on either of those two items. And we're going to move to number 3, consider resolution nominating candidates to the Board of Directors of the Hayes County Appraisal District. Is there a nomination?
Yes, I would like to nominate Joe
Castillo.
He to the Hayes County Appraisal District. He's been our representative for many years.
And I'll second that.
Any other nominations for that position? And my understanding is that we can nominate up to 5 people. But for my colleagues who are participating in this process for the first time, the way that it works is that it's broken down through all of the different contributing tax entities. So we can nominate 5 people, but we really are best off if we put all of our weight behind one person, and then we have somebody who's designated certainly to watch out for our interests, whereas if we nominate 5 people, then when the other entities vote on them, we could end up having nobody on the board that looks out for SMCISD entities. Do I have that correct, Dr. Cardona?
Yes, and for 2022, we'll have 674 votes, which is the idea behind voting for supporting one candidate.
And Mr. Costilla is not here tonight, but he has served for us for many years in this capacity. And at the present time, he is, I believe, the president of the Board of Directors of the Hayes County Appraisal District. So he serves us very well. Questions? Okay, other than I would take a vote in favor of nominating Joe Castilla to the Board of Directors of the Hayes County Appraisal District. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed, 7-0. And then we are to consider a resolution nominating a candidate for the vacancy on the Hayes County Appraisal District Board of Trustees. And it's my understanding that we also do not have a nominee for this position, that somebody has vacated that, but it is not Mr. Costilla. So,
correct.
Any other body to put forward? Not at this time. We will table that. And now, a discussion of possible action to identify our core commitments. When the board met earlier this month to review and discuss in a workshop our core commitments that had been adopted several years ago. We wanted to make sure that we were all on board with that. We had some proposed changes that really didn't change the spirit of the core commitments, maintained those same values, but changed the wording. And I don't believe we have that wording here, but I think if anybody has a question about that, I think we were all pretty unanimous on that. Mr. Doyle maybe has them here.
No.
Oh, no, okay.
He's ready for the
I was thinking you were going to get up and read us the core commitments with the edits that we've made.
He's taking on several responsibilities.
Okay.
That look was priceless.
Do we have questions, Dr. Salmi?
No, but I feel like we had a consensus on the language, and I would like to move that we adopt the language that we discussed at our previous board meeting at the beginning of the month.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Dr. Salmi, seconded by Ms. Cantu. Any questions or comments on that? Super. And then all in favor of adopting them as presented, please raise your hand. Opposed, raise your hand. That'll pass 7-0. And then just so the public knows, the board will be conducting another workshop in the coming weeks to work with administration on the survey and assessments that they are doing with community input to try to bring those two processes together so that we can develop a comprehensive strategic plan to move forward with at every level of that, from the board into the classroom, et cetera. So, now, Mr. Doyle, with the finance action items, please.
Yes, I'm here for finance. On page 166, you'll see the action item to consider the acceptance of the certified appraisal roll and the supplemental appraisal roll for the San Marcos CISD school district. It's the administration's recommendation to approve to accept the certified and supplemental rolls as presented in the book.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Ms. Cantu,
Second.
And seconded by trustee Salmi. Do we have any questions on that? So the motion is to approve the certified and supplemental appraisal rolls for tax year 2023 for the San Marcos CISD, San Marcos CISD as presented. All in favor? All opposed? That carries 7-0.
Next, on page 233, you'll see the action item for the, considering the resolution for the authorization of the defeasance that we just discussed. Again, it's a recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees adopts a resolution authorizing defeasance of certain portions of the district's currently outstanding obligations and other matters thereto.
Ms. Halsey, I move that we authorize the defeasance of certain portions of the district's currently outstanding obligations and other matters related thereto as presented in our board book.
Second.
Motion made by Dr. Salmi and seconded by Ms. Kane. Any questions? All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? That carries 7-0. Item number 3.
Next, on 241, this is a new requirement for school districts for districts to adopt a resolution to designate an officer or an employee to calculate the no new revenue rates and the voter approval rates. You can see here that's recommendation, and it's recommendation from TA to establish the district CFO as that rep. So it's a recommendation of the district to move forward with this.
Motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Ms. Cantu.
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Salmi. Questions? All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed?
Congratulations, Ms.
Oh, sorry.
Garcia.
Did you have a question? Okay. 7-0.
Congratulations.
And item number 4, Mr. Doyle.
Alrighty, this is the no new revenue tax rate and the voter approval tax rate. You can see on page 244 in the board book, you can see last year's rates that we discussed earlier in my presentation. This year, the voter approval tax rate, you can see it would be, if approved, the maintenance and operation tax rate would be 0.6802. This year's debt service rate would be 0.3113 for a total voter approval tax rate of 0.9915.
Ms. Halsey, I'd like to move that we approve the presented tax rate as presented in our board book, which is, let me just finish doing a little math here, 0.1405 cents on the $100 less than our tax rate last year. So I move that we approve that reduced tax rate.
I'll second that motion.
Questions? All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? And that also carries 7-0.
And finally, on page 245, you'll see the ordinance setting the tax rate for setting the 23 tax rate for the school district. This ordinance would be, you can see on page 246, this is what we would post on our website and notify our CADs and our comptroller. So it's a recommendation that the Board of Trustees set the tax rate as presented in the ordinance.
Ms. Halsey, I move that we set the tax rate as previously approved just a second ago.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Dr. Salmi, seconded by Ms. Villalpando. Any questions? So we have a motion to set the tax rate at 0.9915 on every $100. And everybody in favor, please raise your hand. And opposed? And that also carries 7-0. Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. That is good news for the taxpayers of San Marcos CISD. Thank you to our finance department for your great work. We appreciate it. At this time, we're going to move into closed session as authorized by the Texas Government Code Section 551.001 and 551.076 and 551.074 to receive a personnel update and to have a discussion regarding technology, including our cybersecurity plan.